The slow burn love story that ended over Fishy Pancakes. I met him through mutual friends, and at first, he was utterly enchanting, intelligent, suave, attentive. Let's call him Nosferatu. I was 28, still full of creative fire, and he was 38, with a whisper of worldliness. Everything felt cinematic, like I'd slipped into some slow burn romance. He complimented my writing, shared obscure films, even debated art history with a spark in his eye. With him, I felt seen. Truth is, I grew up building worlds in my head. My parents fought so often that their voices became wallpaper to my childhood. I retreated into my room to read, to paint, to write. At 11, I wrote to Leonora Carrington, the surrealist painter, because my grandfather knew her. She wrote back. That little exchange filled me with hope, whispered that art was real magic. So I poured my soul into a single piece, 7 years crafting a prose poem screenplay, a 2-hour immersive soundtrack playing in my mind as I wrote. It was impossible to film, impossible to stage, yet perfect in language. It was me distilled into words and music and dreams. When I was ready, I submitted it to literary agents, stars in the sky of ambition. That's when the cracks showed. Nosferatu, who had beamed at my creativity, now demanded to read it. I gave it to him on trembling paper. I even walked through the story with him, pressing play on a speaker for the soundtrack, watching his face flicker in the candlelight of my tiny apartment. He skimmed. He laughed. Then, without mercy, "You are terrible. Give it up." No critique, just mockery. He read passages aloud, twisting my fragile sentences into punchlines. The bones of my dreams rattled. I closed the door behind him and cried so hard I could barely breathe. I felt small, worthless. And for a moment, I almost believed him. I asked myself, what would Leonora Carrington do in a situation like this? Leonora's legend included a moment when Luis Buñuel, master surrealist director, invited her to his love nest. He'd curated the space. But she, true to her magic, repainted the walls with her menstrual blood while he was in the bathroom. When he returned, stunned, he never spoke to her again. Power. Defiance. Art made real. That was the answer. I decided that if the man before me was going to break my spirit, then I would break his illusions. I wanted closure and confrontation wrapped in surrealist rebellion, a moment carved out with equal parts anger and art. I texted him, "I made pancakes." He arrived with his usual swagger. Stepping inside, he sniffed and frowned. "It smells like fish," he noted. "It's the pancakes," I said. I tried and failed to suppress a laugh. He shrugged and sat at the table, lifting the first pancake. Halfway through his first bite, his eyes widened. He stopped chewing. He swallowed. Then he pushed the plate away and rushed to the bathroom, vomiting. I sat with the plate before me, hands steady, heart pounding. When he stumbled out, pale and shaky, I began the performance. I exposed just one button of my shirt, slow and deliberate. I placed my hand on my chest and said, softly, "Those pancakes are sweetened. With something special. Lady syrup. Girl goo. Mermaid marinade. La creme de meow meow." I slowed down as I unbuttoned another button, revealing more skin with each word. He stared, a mixture of repulsion and hesitation flickering across his face. When the shirt was open, I paused. My voice dropped. "You are tasting feminine essence." "My essence. We're talking intimacy. Biology." He staggered back. The plate clattered. Then, in a voice choked with disgust, he yelled, "You are disgusting. Do you have an infection? You have an infection." And with that, he shoved the table, slammed out the door, and left, his coat flapping behind him, the door vibrating in its frame. Alone in the silent apartment, I felt something shift. The pancake batter splattered across the table, the faint odor of sardine juice mixing with my perfume. Because the truth was, there was no mermaid marinade. No hormonal absurdity. Just canned sardine juice, stirred into the batter from a can stored too close in my cupboard. But the performance had worked. He recoiled, shame, shock, disgust, everything he dished out reversed back on him. I stood in the wreckage of dishes and fantasies and realized, I chose this. He lost more than I did. I had burned the last tether to his cruelty. I had shattered his control, exposed his limitations. I had reclaimed my power with surrealist artistry, and the way he stormed out proved it. I had promised myself, and Leonora's voice whispered in my mind, that I would never again let a man make me doubt my dreams. Those 7 years of writing, screaming, crying, and rewriting weren't wasted. They are mine. That absurd pancake scene? A surrealist kiss goodbye to doubt and fear, and an invitation to my wild heart to fly again. I pulled the pan from the sink, rolled up my sleeves, and went back to writing. Nosferatu evaporated from my inbox, my calendar, and my life. But my work remained. The scent of paper and ink filled the room as I opened my manuscript again. Because I decided, no man, no rejection, no cruelty, no matter how devastating, is ever powerful enough to steal my voice. And I have pages yet unwritten to prove it. The next morning, the air in my apartment felt lighter, days older, but my spirit somehow fresher. I woke to rays sneaking through half-closed curtains and stretched open the door to let in a hint of breeze, as if inviting new beginnings. The stage of last night's surreal pancake performance still cluttered my table, the plate with flaky batter, a faint sardine undertone lingering in the air. I allowed a slow exhale of gratitude. It was over. He was gone. And more importantly, I was still here. I busied myself with small rituals, brewed strong coffee, slid the skillet across the stove to wash, wiped the table clear of crumbs and memory. Each movement was intention, manifesting a quieter determination from deep within. There was work to do, a manuscript that had weathered insults, doubt, and 7 years of fierce refining, and it needed me now more than ever. I sat before the manuscript, pages of prose poem screenplay that had in many ways become my life's heartbeat, and allowed the silence to greet me. Without fear or pressure, I cracked it open again, ready to enter its strange world of impossible scenes and impossible longing. A tremble of hope crept in when the words started to unfold, sentence by sentence, reassembling themselves into something warm and whole. A text came from my best friend, "Saw your post, but badass. Coffee later?" A smile touched me, "Yes, coffee later." Because real life safety and friendship mattered. I replied, "Yes. Fuel me." And felt brighter. The morning blurred into afternoon as I wrote, not perfectly, but with careful honesty. I explored themes of transformation, women who incinerate toxic influences and rise, phoenix-like, from ash. I layered surreal imagery into dialogue that rippled with humor and resistance, just as I had wielded pancakes as poetry and protest. I imagined scenes where dreams don't sit idle waiting to be validated, where they're defended, celebrated, and fiercely protected. By evening, I slipped into a cozy blue sweater that smelled like the ocean. I walked to a nearby cafe, not nearly so dramatic as last night's stage, but simply human. I ordered an espresso and opened my notebook to write a letter, an encouragement, really, to anyone who'd ever had their voice stomped. I wrote, "Your words matter. Even if the world sneers, even if a man with a voice demands you shut up, you're more than terrible. You're alive in language, in defiance, in the choice to keep writing." I folded the words, slipped them into my pocket. Outside, the sky held gentle promise. The wind rustled the leaves. My heart felt lighter. On my way home, I paused at a streetlight, took one more deep breath. I thought of Leonora Carrington, painting walls red with menstrual truth, refusing to dim. I thought of surrealist bravery, lived in kitchen theaters and quiet offices with blank pages. I thought of me, 30 years old, a swirl of past rejection and present resolve, weaving rebellion into words. The accelerator light turned green. I crossed the street and carried my notebook a little closer. The city murmured with possibility. And I stepped forward, freshly alive, ready for whatever page came next. Morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the pan still congealed with bread-crumbled sardine residue. The apartment smelled faintly of metal and memory. Last night's pancake ritual had reshaped my world. I felt something crack open inside me. I wasn't just free of his cruelty, I was filled with a strange, beautiful weight. I made strong coffee and retrieved my manuscript, the 7 years in the making prose poem screenplay. I flipped to a scene set in a deserted desert ruin, where half-horse, half-hyena creatures circled a woman weaving clouds into rope. The words glowed on the page, predatory yet poised, wild while precise. My pulse quickened. It was no accident. I'd been steered by Carrington's self-portrait, in Of the Dawn Horse. In that painting, Leonora sits poised on the edge of a chair, in worn riding jodhpurs, gesturing to a lactating hyena. Through a window, a white horse gallops free. Above her floats a rocking horse, tethered yet potent. The image echoed my own world, poised between restraint and rebellion, ancestral expectations and electric liberation. I smoothed the page, braced my fingers, and began rewriting. My protagonist, the woman at the table, would face down her patriarchal betrayer with ritual, not rage. In the glare of a candle, she would stir wine into her blood, painting the walls red, an echo of Carrington's menstrual rebellion in her own Parisian studio, an act of refusal. At noon, sunlight warmed the notebook again. I recalled down below Carrington's account of transforming her blood into comprehensive energy, masculine and feminine, microcosmic and macrocosmic. The pancake stunt was my personal down below. I had turned something grotesque into control, disgust into statement. My story would hold that power. Late afternoon, my friend knocked and entered with 2 espressos. She didn't ask what happened, she simply watched me rewrite a scene that fused poetic speech with performance art. I told her I was weaving alchemy and narrative. Carrington had done it with murals in her Montségur farmhouse, blending fish and lizards into her environment, feminizing surrealism live. Her nod was all the validation I needed. This wasn't madness. It was method. As evening gathered, I drew myself in ink as a giantess echoing the guardian of the egg, a luminous maternal figure crowned with swan wings, guarding her own creative womb. I titled the sketch She Who Holds Her Own. Pen down, I whispered into the dark, I am not terrible. I am not defeated. The words landed like songs, gestures of defiance, framed by surrealist intent. I rise tomorrow with more than pages, I carry visceral protest, surrealist blood rituals, painted bodies in motion. I hold that giantess figure inside me, a sentinel guarding my dreams, my voice, my art. Because surrealism isn't escape, it's assertion. It's living in your own narrative, bleeding on the walls if need be, rewriting the rules. And I'm not done writing the next chapter. Morning light streamed through the pale curtains as I savored the stillness. My apartment no longer smelled of sardine-infused pancakes but held the soft hum of possibility. I cradled my coffee, studying the manuscript that now felt less like a burden and more like a vessel, fertile, ready to bloom. I turned to the scene I'd rewritten, the one anchored in Carrington's potent imagery. A protagonist, framed by candlelight, repaints her world in the red of her own blood, a ritual defiance echoing Carrington's famed menstrual protest in Paris. That image had taken root in me, cultivating a deeper resilience. I opened my desk drawer and pulled a print of Carrington's The Giantess, the guardian of the egg, a majestic female figure standing amid wheat, cradling an egg as geese soar from her cloak. The giantess embodies what I strive for, holding new life, presence made mythic. The egg she shields, a symbol carried across Carrington's life, from her art to her magical narratives, tells of universes held within a single being. Inspired, I lifted my pen. The protagonist, once cowering beneath Nosferatu's shadow, now becomes cosmic. She holds the manuscript of her soul, poised like a divine fetus in her hands. Below her, geese swirl in affirmation, tiny versions of herself and her supportive community gather at her feet, bearing witness and solidarity. At noon, I stepped outside to clear my head. A warm breeze carried scents of jasmine and earth. I ran into my best friend while searching for inspiration in the neighborhood park. Without missing a beat, she asked about my rewrite. I described the giantess scene, how the formula, red ritual, cosmic rebirth, communal circle, felt like home. She looked at me with quiet admiration, then said, "You've risen from ashes." As evening approached, the apartment filled with dim lamplight. I leaned into the final pages of the manuscript, the protagonist now crystallized. No cartoon villain, no broken victim, just a woman towering through her own cosmos, rooted and fierce. She doesn't ask permission, she paints with blood and defies collapse. I sketched a helmeted figure in the margins, a survivor giantess wielding her pen like a blade. I signed beneath, "She who holds her own." I whispered into the hush, "I am that giantess." Tomorrow, I returned to the page as the protector of my vision, a guardian of the egg inside me. My pancakes taught me performance, my revision taught me belief, and Carrington taught me that power lies in the cosmic holding. So I write again, plume in hand, heart scaled by myth, footsteps echoing across new terrain. The door slam behind Nosferatu is now an archway to something else, something made of eggs, giants, and exquisite sovereignty. My story continues, in ink, in ritual, in finding home in the mythic. Morning sunlight poured into my studio apartment, illuminating the ink-splattered pages strewn across my desk. The remnants of last night's iteration, sketches, blood ritual dialogue, surreal desert scenes, lay in triumphant disarray. I understood now that the protagonist I was shaping was no longer my victim but a mythic guardian of her own narrative. I pulled up a digital image of Carrington's The Giantess, guardian of the egg, its muted turquoise backdrop and glowing wheat-haloed figure filling my screen. The almost lifelong reverence of that painting gripped me. The towering woman, cradling an egg while geese spiral upward, dwarfs the tiny figures at her feet, witnesses to her regenerative power. Between her tiny hands, the egg becomes both microcosm and macrocosm, a world unto itself. I hovered my finger over the image and then turned back to my pages. I would channel that epic stillness into my heroine, not giant in size, but in resolve. I wrote. Under a sky made of antlers and unspooled clouds, she stands, book in hand, heart alight. In her grasp, a manuscript coiled like a sleeping world. Around her ankles gather those she saved, not because she was gentle, but because she was fierce. I described tiny companions, a trio of women, reminiscent of the symbolism in Carrington's work, gathering around book and egg, a protective conclave molding sacred space from story. Just like the groups of three recurring in Carrington's art, this mirrored the circle of family, friends, and self that had supported me. By afternoon, the apartment felt electric. I painted over coffee-stained pages and added geese gliding from the margins, symbols of migration, homecoming, and transcendence. The protagonist no longer hides, she radiates authority, egg singer, storykeeper, myth in motion. Late evening, I extruded lines from my sketchbook, weaving a ritual. She dips her quill in ink mixed with rose and salt, each letter an alchemical transformation. She names the men who shelled her dreams, not in rage, but to map her landscape of power. The ritual resets the narrative, predator becomes echo, rejection becomes root. I sent those pages to my friend, breath held. Within minutes, her reply arrived, this is cosmic. You've become power with a pen. I closed the manuscript and whispered to the silent room, I am the giantess now. No longer victim, but guardian. Around me, midnight candles flickered, echoing back the ghost of geese, the hum of unreal worlds made true. Sunlight hit my face as breeze fluttered the curtains, a new day not just in date, but in declaration. Today, I would begin querying agents again, this time not shattered, but sustained. I poured coffee and chose a playlist of unlikely compositions, dissonant choral tones and surrealist soundscapes. In the background, a lone flute note soared, a serpent echo in my chest. I opened the document titled Agent Queries 2.0. Over 7 years I'd sent this manuscript into the void, bearing hope and heartbreak. Now, it carried myth, ritualized, cosmic, unassailable. I wrote. Dear, agent name. 7 years ago I submitted a prose poem screenplay steeped in surrealism and ritual. It was dismissed, not for lack of craft, but for challenging what stories can be. Since then, my protagonist has grown. She weaves blood rituals, recites starlight prophecies, cradles worlds. She is me, and I am her. I invite you to enter her universe. My pulse thrummed as I hit send. Like letting a bird free with a letter tied to its leg. Mid-morning, I walked through the park. A woman with silver hair glanced at my notebook, asked, writing the epic? I nodded, she smiled and replied, guard that gift. I did. Back at home, the phone blinked with a local publisher's number. They'd seen the snippet I'd posted online, a ritual scene with menstrual painted walls, and wanted more. My heart staggered. I answered. They asked questions, about tone, length, audience. I was steady. I spoke of Carrington's painted rituals, of the giantess, of sexual power, myth, and reclamation. I spoke of my 7-year journey. They listened. By day's end, an email arrived, we want to consider it for publication. I pressed my hands to my chest, in awe. Tonight, I light candles again, smoke wisps like spirits, geese in migration. I read back pages from my rewritten chapters, imagining them off the page soon, mythic, lyrical, alive. In the silence, I smile, he, Nosferatu, will never read it. But the world might. I cradle my pen slowly now. I am the giantess. Guardian of the egg. Keeper of story. The night is unfurled, ripe with possibility. And tomorrow, I write again, redeemed, witnessed, ever more resolute. I close the manuscript and feel the weight of its wound and repair, 7 years of hope and heartbreak cradled in every line. The pancakes are washed away, the door slammed shut, and Nosferatu is dust in my past. What remains is me, the woman who painted her power with words and ritual, who carried myth into the kitchen, into the pages, into the world. Tonight, I take one last look at the candlelit sketch of the giantess holding her egg. A testament not just to survival, but to becoming, guardian, creator, sovereign of my own narrative. The final pages lie ready for the world. My voice carries forward, undefeated. And in the quiet after midnight, I whisper, this is just the beginning.